On June 6, 1967, Israeli Air Force fighters attacked Egyptian air bases, destroying 80% of their air assets. By June 7th, the air forces of Jordan and Syria were also destroyed, mostly on the ground, but the war was being monitored. The United States and other nations had a vested interest in what was transpiring in the Middle East, and gathering intelligence was critical for both political and strategic military planning. What was the USS Liberty? Why was it in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea during the Six-Day War? Why did Israeli air and naval forces attack an American ship? Why was so much effort put into the cover-up after the event?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, a veteran of the United States Army and Marine Corps, former history professor, book author, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History.
The USS Liberty was a floating CIA intelligence gathering platform monitoring all transmissions from all sources involved in the 1967 Six-Day War. Israeli progress was followed as well as the Arab coalition of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, known as the United Arab Republic. As a result, Israel secured Sinai, all of Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. But Israeli intelligence had reported to Chief of Israeli Naval Operations, Admiral Issi Rahar, that a ship had fired upon El Arish in Sinai. This was proven to be a ruse. The only ship in that area was the USS Liberty, which flew the U.S. flag and was in international waters. In what was described by both President Lyndon B. Johnson and the Israeli government as a case of mistaken identity, Israeli air and naval assets attacked the USS Liberty on June 8th, killing 34 Americans and wounding 172 of the 294-man crew. Previously, the United States had announced that it had no naval forces within hundreds of miles of the battlefront on the floor of the United Nations a few days earlier. However, the USS Liberty was assigned to monitor the fighting. As a result of a series of United States communication failures, whereby messages directing the ship not to approach within 100 miles were not received by the Liberty, the ship sailed to within 14 miles off the Sinai coast. Also notified of the supposed attack upon El Arish were Colonel Shmuel Kislev, head of Israeli Air Force operations, and General Yeshayahu Benket, the head of Israeli Air Force intelligence. Kislev told his pilots that, quote, if they could confirm that it was a military ship, they could hit it, end quote. The naval contingent was also on the alert. Beneket wanted to have positive identification of the ship that may have been involved. Israeli Dassault Mirage fighters passed by and gave their report. The flight leader confirmed that it was an American ship. More Israeli fighters attacked at 14:05 hours for 20 minutes, firing cannons, machine guns, and rockets, and one report from the first pilot who hit the ship stated that oil was leaking. During that time, on board Liberty, radioman Terry Halbardier and Glenn Oliphant followed the captain's order and broadcast in the clear that they were under attack by unknown forces and needed assistance, but their communications antennae were then damaged. They performed a manual repair and began transmitting in the open as their secure channel was being jammed. The 6th Fleet received the SOS and informed the commander of the carrier task force on board the USS Saratoga, Captain Joseph Tully, who called and launched 12 F-4 Phantom fighters to assist Liberty. And the hotline between Washington, D.C. and Moscow was activated. Moscow was informed that American aircraft were being launched only to surmise the situation regarding the Liberty, not to get involved in the war. But as the Phantoms were en route just minutes away from saving the Liberty, it was reported that Secretary of Defense Robert Strange McNamara mysteriously had them recalled. The only way a SecDef could do that was by presidential authority. Johnson knew the truth, and he was part of the problem. The next wave of Israeli aircraft arrived after the Phantoms returned to the Saratoga, and these were Dassault Super Mysteers with napalm and canister bombs. One pilot called out the ship's identification as Charlie Tango Romeo 5, and that there is no flag on her. This was a strange report, as the previous recon flight clearly stated that there was an American flag, and the ship was identified as such. It is believed that this call was made as a ruse to cover the Israelis should these attacks be recorded by third parties. When that transmission was made, Colonel Kislev ordered all aircraft to stop the attack, as he believed that the ship was, in fact, American from the call sign. But the Israeli commander of the torpedo boat squadron, Moshe Oren, stated that he was not informed that there was a recall from an attack, and was informed, in fact, that it was the Egyptian freighter, the El Qasir. Therefore, he launched 3 motor torpedo boats. The order to halt all attacks, which followed the second wave of fighters, was supposedly not received by the naval assets, whose 3 torpedo boats launched 6 torpedoes at the Liberty, with 5 failing to hit target, but the one that did contact killed 25 men and wounded many more. This account is in great dispute. However, the Israeli argument of misidentification fails for several reasons, one being that if they believed it was an Egyptian ship, why did they specifically jam the secure American radio frequency, which were specifically narrow bands? Another problem was the identification issue, in that the Liberty, at 10,150 tons, was 5 times larger than the ship they claimed to have mistaken for the Liberty. Both ships had totally different profiles. In addition, if the attack was a simple error, why were the Israeli jets unmarked, bearing no Israeli symbols, carrying no national identification, in violation of international law? Had the F-4 Phantoms from the Saratoga not been recalled, the torpedo boats would not have been able to engage, and the majority of the men would not have been killed and wounded. The official American position was that Israel called and said that they had recognized their mistake and the attack was over. So therefore, in response, McNamara recalled the jets. However, the attacks were then renewed for another 80 minutes. This was a strange development, since the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv reported that the Israelis had attacked a ship, but the nationality of the ship was yet undetermined by Israel. If this was true, how would McNamara know to recall the Phantoms, and that it was in fact the Liberty? The SOS was resent after the damaged antenna was repaired again, and it was picked up this time by the aircraft carrier USS America, and 2 ships were dispatched. 3 life rafts were deployed so men could get off the burning ship, but the torpedo boats focused their fire, destroying 2 of the life rafts and sweeping the decks to kill as many men as they could to prevent an evacuation. That act alone is a violation of the Geneva Convention, not to mention attacking a ship from a non-belligerent nation in international waters. Another strange development was when, after the 2-hour attack, the ship and crew headed to Malta, the 6th Fleet Commander, Rear Admiral Isaac Kidd, ordered the survivors to remove the ship's name from their uniforms. In fact, Admiral Kidd even ordered them to go ashore in civilian clothes, which the men were not supposed to have anyway. They were also told to grant no interviews and do not discuss the situation, even among each other. Otherwise, they would face court-martial and prison, or, even worse, for violating national security. Both Israelis and Americans involved had their opinions on what happened and why. One voice was that of Navy Captain Dr. Richard Kiefer, who was wounded badly himself but worked for 28 hours straight saving lives when he could. He received the Silver Star. Captain William McConaughey received the Medal of Honor for his efforts following the 13 repetitious attacks after his bridge crew were killed, himself badly wounded. His recollection was that the aircraft hit the ship from every direction in multiple waves. Since the attack involved the Israeli Air Force and Navy, that made it a combined arms attack, meaning that it was coordinated, which also meant that command authority came from the seat of government. The military did not simply attack an unknown ship in international waters, let alone an American ship, without orders. All the crew believed that the ship was clearly identified as American, as there were reconnaissance aircraft that passed by close enough for the crew to look into the cockpits. Several high-ranking American military and political persons knew at that time that the attack was deliberate. The question was why. The cover-up was incredible. For example, the press was given limited information to downplay the event. The men were sworn to secrecy, and the Judge Advocate General of the Navy, Admiral Merlin Starling, was given only 24 hours to review the 600-page Court of Inquiry investigation report. He had great reservations about the veracity of the report. In fact, the Navy inquiry did not allow any testimony or evidence regarding the unmarked Israeli aircraft. No information was included about the life rafts that were shot up, or the electronics transmission jamming, or even McNamara's recall of the American fighters. This was the first and only time in U.S. history that a board of inquiry refused to accept testimony from American service members who survived an attack and only accepted the statements of the forces that had attacked them. Bill LeMay, a crewman, was given the name tag Smith, removed from a hospital ward with a dozen other patients and placed into a single room. A naval officer soon entered and told him that his name was now Smith, that he was never on the Liberty, and he was never to discuss the matter. In another completely absurd and totally insane turn of events, the Senate records, as well as the Medal of Honor Society, recorded that Captain McGonagall's Medal of Honor was earned in Vietnam, not off the Sinai Peninsula. His Medal of Honor citation mentions no specific geographic location and does not mention who the enemy was. Also, the ship's log was also altered to fit the Israeli timeline, supporting that only after 20 minutes of engagement, the ship was attacked for a total of 50 minutes and not 2 hours, breaking off contact after they realized their error. This was obviously not true. But why the cover-up? Why the attack? Over the years, logic mandates that the Israelis knew that the Liberty was a communications gathering spy ship and would be listening in on all communications, Arab and Israeli. Their push into the Golan Heights, as well as their attack in the Sinai, would have been recorded in real time by the Liberty. In fact, the director of the National Security Agency, Marshall Carter, stated that he believed the attack was deliberate so that Israel could maintain the secrecy of their operations. Sinking the ship and killing all on board was the only way for Israel to have accomplished that mission. The CIA transcripts were handed to the American ambassador in Lebanon at that time. The transcripts clearly show that the pilots, upon reaching Liberty, reported that it was an American ship. Their war room ordered them to attack. Again, the flight commander repeated his warning that the ship was American. Again, he was told, "You have your orders," and the attack started. These reports were also supported by an EC-121 airborne surveillance aircraft operated by the National Security Agency, which also recorded these transmissions, confirming that Israel knew the ship was American. They even stated in their own radio transmissions that they saw the flag. And this was true for both the air and naval assets involved in the attack, contradicting their official statements. What came to light later was the justification for sinking the Liberty and killing the crew. Moshe Dayan, the commander-in-chief of Israeli forces, had ordered the attack. This was due to the fact that Israeli commanders in the field were authorized to execute Egyptian prisoners of war rather than lose time transporting and securing them. Israeli military historian Uri Milstein claimed that there were many incidents in the 1967 war in which Egyptian soldiers were killed by Israeli troops after they had raised their hands in surrender. It was not an official policy, but there was an atmosphere that it was okay to do it, Milstein said. Some commanders decided to do it, others refused, but everyone knew about it. Declassified Israeli Defense Force documents show that on June 11, 1967, the operations branch of the General Staff felt it necessary to issue new orders concerning the treatment of prisoners. The order read that, because existing orders were contradictory, thus: 1. Soldiers and civilians who surrendered were not to be hurt by any means. 2. Soldiers and civilians who possessed a weapon and failed to surrender would be killed. However, soldiers caught disobeying the order by killing prisoners would be severely punished. Now, this appears to be damage control and could only have been issued from Dayan due to the Israeli knowledge that they did not destroy the Liberty and that intercept transmissions could prove these criminal actions. This appears to be a classic case of covering their collective rear ends. If this information were to have gotten out, it would prove that Israel was committing war crimes, and the Liberty was a known intelligence gathering source. Israel's legitimacy was already in question since they launched the preemptive strike on Arab airfields, as their intelligence supposedly had information that the Arab forces were preparing to launch attacks against Israel. American officials at the highest level would have known this, including President Johnson and Robert McNamara. It does not take a great stretch of logic to understand why the cover-up took place, and from where it originated. The United States could not afford to have its great ally Israel accused of war crimes. The USA and NATO also had great interest in seeing the Israelis win, because a victory would reduce the effectiveness of the influence the Soviet Union had with the United Arab Republic, which was the coalition of Jordan, Syria, and Egypt. It would also hopefully reduce the interest of Saudi Arabia in funding the United Arab Republic triumvirate if their efforts seemed to be a lost cause. An Israeli victory would have also ensured that the Suez Canal would remain open, which benefited the USA and NATO. The U.S. had good reasons for a cover-up. There are contradictory reports available where U.S. officials claimed to have debunked the murders of Egyptian POWs as the reason for the attack, supporting the Israeli attack as mistaken identity. That is also part of the cover-up, because later, murdered Egyptian soldiers were found in shallow graves, and the Israeli government offered reparations to the families of the men who were identified. In May 1968, the Israeli government paid $3.32 million US dollars, the equivalent of $28 million in 2022, to the U.S. government in compensation for the families of the 34 men killed in the attack. In March 1969, Israel paid a further $3.57 million, or $28.5 million in 2022, to the men who had been wounded. In December 1980, it agreed to pay $6 million, or $21.3 million in 2022 money, as the final settlement for material damage to Liberty itself, plus 13 years of interest. Several prominent Americans, generals, admirals, and even Medal of Honor recipients, as well as the surviving crew, have asked for a full congressional investigation into the attack and the cover-up for decades. Personally, I doubt that will ever happen.
Thank you for watching Forgotten History. Please click like, subscribe, and share. Send us comments and show ideas, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Until next time.